So we saw Spring MVC flow and few examples related to Spring MVC, right? Yeah. Today I'm going to talk about a very important thing in Spring MVC flow. You might think that it is little complicated, but very important. Let's see. Just a second. So just a minute, please. So today we'll see validations. We're going to work with these validations. So especially the server-side validations, how or what kind of support we have in Spring MVC for validations. That is what I'm going to show you. So in the last class, if you people can remember, so what we did is we have developed this controller, so which has got two methods. It has got two methods, you see, and for both the methods we have configured the same URL. So how we are going to distinguish this methods here? That means how the framework will be able to understand these two methods. Like when it will call this method show view and when it is going to call this process request method. Yes. So yeah, by HTTP methods. Now you will place the request for register process, let's say. So we'll place the request for register process, right? Both the methods are configured with the same URL. So if the client places a request for this URL register process using HTTP method get, then this method will be called show view method. Okay, so this method will be invoked here. HTTP method get will be invoked. Next, you have another method, process request. This method is also configured with request, so the URL register process. Now when this method will be called? When the client places HTTP method post request. When the client places HTTP method post request, this method will be called. Yeah, that is how it works. Now, last question. Let me see how far you understood this. What exactly we are doing in this method? Show view method. What exactly we are doing here in this show view method? Can you people tell me? In that show view method, what exactly we are doing? So what is that empty object basically? Why we have to return that empty object? Yes. What is that object called as in MVC terminology? It is actually called as a command object. The register object is actually called as a command object. Command object. So what is the specialty about the command object? It holds the form data. Okay. Yes. So you see, in this line, we are registering that command object which will be used to populate the form data. And what exactly we are returning here? What is this value which you are returning here? I can say that this method here, it returns the input JSP name. Please make a note of it if you haven't done that. First of all, in this line, it registers command object which is used to populate form data. Next, returns the input JSP name. That value which is returned by this method, it is nothing but that input JSP name. That is what it returns. Okay, yep. Hope you people got it. Yes, that is a view name, which is nothing but input JSP. That means that JSP in which you have that form, input form. Okay, yeah. So we will not directly call that JSP, register JSP instead. You see, here it will be written this way. Yes, fine. Okay, now you see the process request method. So it will be invoked when that form is submitted. You see, that form data is populated into that command object and it is passed on to this particular process request method. Yes, that is how it works. Okay, so now today we are going to validate this form data. Let's validate this form data. So we'll do a server side validation. In the register form, let's see what is the scope for server side validation. So the validation which we have to do on the server side, not on the client side. So client side validations are handled by JavaScript. Okay, so server side validations are taken care by this. We have to do this backend processing itself for this. On the server side, in this application itself, you have to take care of it. Yes. So Spring MVC provides very good support for server side validations. Okay, let's try to do that. Now for suppose you see through the form, register form, user will be trying to register themselves, right? While registering, users will give the username, right? User has to provide the username. So that username, user will be selecting their own username. So users will be given a choice to provide their own username. But here there is a risk that you see that username might have been already taken by some other user. So that there is every chance that this user name might have been taken by some other user. So that is what we have to check, whether this username which user has selected while registering, you know, whether it is taken by some other user, whether that username is taken by some other user by any chance. That is what we need to check. And you see this username, whether it is taken by some other user or not, we have to check it on the server side. not on the client side, right? Yes. So let's try to write that validation code. So if you want to write that validation code, in that case, what you need to do is you have to, you know, use validations interface, validator interface. Spring Framework provides validator interface. By implementing this interface, you're going to supply that validation code, I can say. By implementing this interface, you're going to supply that validation code. So here, see, I'm going to write that code. So I'll define a class first of all. Class. I'll write a validator package. I'll create a validator package and we'll call it as a register validator. Yes. As of now, you see, this is just a simple Java class, nothing more than that. Okay. As of now, this is just a simple Java class here. Now let's make it a validator so that we can write that validation code here and use it to validate that register form, especially that username field. To validate that username field, I'm going to use this validator. Okay. Yes. So for that, make this class implements validator interface. So it is in which package, you see? The package structure will give you the idea. See, it is from org.springframework.validation.validation interface. Okay. So in this validator interface, we got couple of methods which we are supposed to override. Okay. We have to override couple of methods. Yes. So what are they? One is supports method, the other one is validate method. These are the two methods which we need to override from that validator interface. So in order to write that custom validation code, okay, please make a note of it. In that validator interface, you have got couple of methods. One is supports, the other one is validate. Yes. So now let me register it as a Spring Bean. I'll call it as register validator. Okay, fine. Now we'll write the validation code here, don't worry. But before that, I would like to do one more thing here. Okay, before we write the validation code. So most important thing is we need to register this validator with the framework. We have to register this validator with the framework. Okay. So let's see how to register this validator with the framework. So for that you have to go to the register controller class. So first of all, now you understood that you'll define the validator using the validator interface, and you see here you have to override these two methods, supports and validate method. Supports and validate method. Okay, couple of methods. Next, we need to register this validator with the framework. That is the second thing what you need to do. So let's try to register this validator with the framework. Okay. Okay. Go to the controller, and in the controller, we have to define a method for this. We have to define a method for this. That method name can be anything. Okay. Let's say register init binder. You can give any name for this method. So we have to annotate this method with a special annotation called as init binder. Annotate this method with a special annotation called as init binder. And this method has to take a parameter, that is web data binder. This method takes a parameter called as web data binder. Web data binder. Okay. So why do we use this method? What is the purpose of this method? This method, which is annotated with init binder, is used to register the validator. Following method is used to register the validator, I can say. Okay. Following method is used to register the validator. So that is what we'll try to do here. Okay. So whenever your framework finds this method with this annotation at the rate init binder, it understands that we are trying to initialize, or we are trying to use this method to register the validator. Okay. So it's very simple now. What we'll do is we'll try to declare a reference variable of type register validator here. And we'll annotate it with auto void. So what happens if I do this? Can you people explain me this statement? What exactly am I trying to do here? What exactly I'm trying to do here? Yes, we are asking the control. We want to make. We are making sure that that register validator is injected into this register controller. Very good. That's right. Excellent. So we are trying to configure that register validator as a dependency for this register controller. So register controller will be using this register validator to register itself, to register this validator. Okay, it will be registering it. So you see, web data binder dot. We're going to use this method set validator and pass that validator object reference. That's it. Pass the validator object reference. That's it. Okay. So hope you people got it. This is how you'll register a validator with the framework. So any questions in this regard, please let me know. Just a minute, please. Just a minute. Yeah, sorry. So please make a note of it. This is how you'll register a validator. Okay. So once you are done registering the validator, now we can use this validator here. You'll find that it will be invoked for validating that register command object. So for this controller, as of now, we got one register command object, right? So that register command object, where you'll have that form data, it will be validated using this validator. Okay. First of all, the framework, what it does is, whenever we submit this, whenever the client submits a form, that means end users, I'm sorry, whenever the end user submits a form, you will find that whenever the end user submits a form, you'll find that first of all, that form data will be populated into that register object, which we have configured here, right? The data will be populated into that register object, and then because we have registered a validator, it will call this validator supports method first. Why it calls a supports method? To check whether this validator is appropriate for validating the register command object or not. Okay, so that register class object will be passed on. The register command class object will be passed on here. So we have to check this, whether this class object is of type register class or not. So if it is of type class object, you see this equals method, we are using the equals method to check whether the given class object is of type register type or not. If it is register type, then this method returns true, which indicates that this validator is actually for validating the register command object. Okay, yeah. Next, we have this validate method. If that supports method returns true, then you will find that mainly this validate method will be called. Okay, this validate method will be known. Yes. This validate method will be called. Now in this validate method, you have to write that validation code. Okay, just a minute, please. Just a minute. I'm sorry. So now this validate method will be called, and that register command object is passed on to this validate method. Okay, so you'll get object type reference, you have to cast it. Now you'll find that there is another parameter here for this method, validate method. The other parameter is errors object, right? What is this errors object? It is also passed on to this method. Framework creates it as an errors object and passes it. Errors object is used to report errors. In order to report errors, the errors object is used. Okay, so let's see. Now let's try to validate this data. Now one important thing here, generally when you are working with validations, if there is any validation error, we need to display that validation error in the web page again, right? So we got a practice to configure this validation errors in a separate file. So what is that file known as? Yes, I guess in Struts framework we have used such a that file, properties file. It's called as resource bundle or properties file. So I have it in another application. I'll quickly copy it. Okay, yeah, the properties file. So in this application, where you will add the properties file, you see under the Java resources, you will find resources folder again. resources folder, main resources. Here you paste it. Okay. You see, this is a validation error message. So, but you know what? The framework is supposed to load this properties file. Okay. How do we ask the framework to load this properties file? Let's see. You need to add the properties file here to the, sorry, you need to configure the properties file details here in the configuration file. So we got a bean, predefined bean here called as reloadable resource bundle message source. You see this class name is very lengthy. Just try to make a note of it. Okay, reloadable resource bundle message source. So what is the purpose of this class, bean class? So we use it to load the properties file. Okay, yes, the resource bundle. And one important note, always the ID of this bean should be message source. The ID of this bean should be message source. Okay. Now let's configure the properties file name which has to be loaded. Okay. Yes. Name is page name. Value class path colon messages. That's it. So that extension you see dot properties is not needed. Okay. You don't need to add that extension dot properties. So this way we load the properties file, or it is actually called as resource bundle. What exactly will have in that properties file? Yes. in that properties file you have error messages configured. Okay, basically in that properties file you have error messages. Error messages are configured in the properties file. Yes. Okay. Now we'll be using it here. Okay. Yeah. Now let's try to write that validation code. So what is the validation we are supposed to do here? We need to check whether that username supplied by the user is already taken by some other user by any chance. So for that you need a list here, right? So let's say just assume that we got that list. You know, generally you may need to fetch it from the database, but we'll assume that we got this usernames list already here, okay, in place. So this usernames list, we need to populate it with the names, usernames. So for that, I'm going to do this. I will add a method. You see, this method name can be anything. It is user-defined method. I'm going to use this method as an initialization method here. I'm going to use this method as a initialization method. Okay. So the way we got init method in the servlets, which is used to write the initialization code, right? So that init method, you know that the container will call it as soon as it instantiates that servlet class. So you know what, here also we can configure this init method similarly. Okay, just place this annotation post construct. So if you place this annotation at the rate post construct here, now it indicates that this method is a init method, now initialization method, that means which can be used for initializing this bean. All of you make a note of it. Actually, this is not just specific to validator. Any bean class, you can use this init methods this way in any bean class. Okay, you can configure it for any bean class, I can say. Hope everyone got it. For any bean in Java, it is possible. You can do that. So this is how we'll initialize the beans in Spring Framework using the post construct method. Okay, using the post construct method, we are going to do that. Okay, yeah. Now let me write that username. Let me just populate that usernames list here. So these are the names which are already taken, let's say. Now, the user supplied username is in that register object, right? User supplied username is in that register object. So we have to read that user supplied name, that register object, from that register bin, okay, and check whether that username is already taken by some other user. How? You have to search for that username in that usernames list which is already existing. So if username list dot contains register dot get name, contains method username, contains method here, it is one of the collection class methods, and you know that it is used to search for an element. Now we want to search for an element. So which element you want to search? That element name, we are passing it as a parameter to this contains method. So this contains method, if it finds that element, it returns true. If it returns true, what exactly it indicates here in this context? If that contains method returns true, what exactly it indicates here in this context? Can you people tell me? Yes. Yeah, that means there is a validation error. It is a validation error, right? It indicates that that username is already taken by some other user. The username is already taken by some other user. Okay? Yes. So it's a validation error. Now we have to, if it is a validation error, so we have to report it to the framework. We need to report this validation error to the framework. How will you report it? You see, through the errors object. Errors object, there is a method called as reject value. So you have to specify that property name, for which property you got that error, validation error. Next to that key, what error message you want to display. You see that error message is configured in the properties file, right? So the key associated to that error message. And lastly, an alternate message. If you see, for example, if there is any issue with this error message in the properties file, you can configure an alternate message. Let's say this is a message which I would like to display. A hard coding one message. By any chance, if there is any issue loading the properties file, then this particular message which you have hard coded here will be used. Okay, fine. So after the validate method finishes execution, the controller's method will be called process request method. The controller's process request method will be called. No matter whether there is any validation error or not, irrespective of that, once the validate method finishes execution, so the controller's method, you see, which is annotated with post method, will be invoked because it has to further process the request. Okay. It has to further process the request, I can say. Yes. So now you see, whenever you're working with validations, it is important to change this method parameters. You have to change this method parameters here. Okay. So what should be the method parameters? Here you should add a binding result as a parameter. I'll tell you what is it. And you add a model object here. And the return type of this method also will change. Change it to string type. Please make a note of this. The first parameter should be the command object which holds that form data. The second parameter will be the binding result object. Okay, let's see what is it. And the third parameter will be the model object here. Okay. Yes. So here one more thing, the return type of this method will also change. It should be string type. So earlier it was what type? This method return type, it was what type? Model and view object. Now it is changed to string type. Let's see why do we need to do this. So there is a reason for that. Okay. Yes. Here, so the next important thing, we need to modify this method code also slightly. It is going to change. So first of all, this method should check whether there is any validation error or not. So the validate method has finished execution, right? Now it's the responsibility of this method to check whether there is any validation error. So how this method will check whether there is any validation error? How this method will check whether there is any validation error? That is where the binding result object is going to help this method control. The binding result object method will help the controllers method to understand whether there is any validation error or not. Okay. So let's see how to use this object. If binding result dot has errors, you see, call this has errors method. So if you call that has errors method, where it is in the binding results, if it returns true, that has errors method, if it returns true, then it indicates that there is a validation error. There is a validation error. Okay. And if there is a validation error, what exactly you're going to do? If there is a validation error, now what to do here? What do you people think? Generally, what will be the case? What you have to do? So we have to display the input JSP again. You need to display the input JSP again. That is what we have to do if there is a validation error, right? So now the controller method, what it does is here, it returns that input JSP name if there is a validation error. So which indicates that here the framework is supposed to display that input JSP. Okay. Yes. So return register. That's it. Now, for suppose let's say there is no validation error. There is no validation error. Then what? So in that case, you know what? We'll return that welcome JSP name. Okay. We'll return that welcome JSP name, which will render the response back to the client. That's it. Okay. You see that welcome JSP will be invoked, no doubt. For suppose to that welcome JSP, I want to pass some data, some response data, which has to be displayed by the welcome JSP. Okay. earlier or previously, how did we pass that response data to the JSP page? How did we do that previously? How did we pass the response data to the JSP page? So through the model and view object, we are trying to share that response data, right? We used to add the response data to the model and view object, right? This time, if you want to share the response data with the JSP page, so in that case, I can say that you can use model object here. You see that third parameter, model object, it can be used for that purpose. We have add attribute method. You see this register object itself, let's say I would like to share it with the welcome page, so that the welcome page will read that data from that register object and it will display it. Okay, yes. So you see, one more important thing, you have to add a notation called as validated before this register, before that first parameter, that command object parameter is there. No? That first parameter is represents command object here. Make sure that before that first parameter you place this annotation at the rate validated. You know what it indicates? It indicates that here we want to make sure that that command object is validated. Okay, yes, you want to make sure that definitely the command object is validated. So that is what it indicates. Okay, so we are all set. Now let's go to this register page. Now so far you see you have developed this register page using plain HTML tags. But let's do one thing. Let's try to create this register page using the Spring tag library. Okay, we'll use Spring tag library here for that purpose. Okay, okay. So already I got such register page which is developed using Spring tag library. So let me just quickly add it here. I'll copy that. You see, this register page, first of all, will add this statement. So what exactly we are doing in that line? Can you people tell me? Why do you use taglet? Why do you use the taglet directive? We are using it to import the tag library, Spring tag library. Okay, please make a note of it. We're importing that Spring form tag library. Using that statement, we're importing Spring form tag library. Yes. Please make a note of it, all of you. So next you see the form here, we are creating it using that Spring form tag library. So you see that suffix, sorry, that prefix is S, which refers to the tag library. That suffix, sorry, that prefix S, it refers to the tag library. You see, again you got that action attribute, that value of that action attribute is process request. So method is post. That means when you submit the form, a post request will be placed for that URL, process request. Next, the command name is register object. So what exactly is this command name here? The command name is register object. You know, while registering the command object here in line number 39, you see, we'll be generally configuring that command object name. The first parameter is that of command object name itself. Okay, yes. Okay, that first parameter is the command object name itself. The second parameter is that object reference, which object you want to add as a parameter, that object reference you're passing it. That's all I can say. Okay, yes, fine. So this way you'll configure the details here. Sorry, not only this, you see, in the form here, for suppose there is a validation error. If there is a validation error, then you will find that again this register page will be invoked, right? You'll find that again the register page will be invoked. So when the register page is invoked, we want that error message to be displayed. When the register page is invoked, we want that error message to be displayed here. Okay. So how will you display that error message? You see, For that you got a special tag here called as errors. We got errors tag for that purpose, to display an error message. Okay. So we got a special tag. So again you see we are configuring the name of that property, errors path equal to user. That means, see, if there is any validation error for that particular property username or for that text field username, you see that errors tag will make sure that it will display that error message. The errors tag will make sure that it will display that error message here. Okay. So this way, for each field you can add that errors tag so that it will display that error message appropriately. Just check that once. Okay. So we are all set. Let's run this code. Okay. So then I'll explain the flow once. So let's try to access that page now, register page first of all. Okay. Yeah. Process request. It is process request itself, right? Okay, I'm sorry. So what is the URL which is configured here? Oh, it is register process. I'm sorry. It is register process. So here also it should be register process. Okay, in the form. Sorry. Register process. You see? So this form is invoked here. Sorry, you got this form. This form is displayed. Let me try to add a name Harry. You see, Harry is already existing in the list. You got that name Harry already in the list. So, you see, means the validation error. If there is a validation error, again the same input JSP has to be invoked. Right? Same input JSP has to be invoked. Let me just, okay, now still you have the same disturbance. Okay, good, thank you. I'll submit this form. You see, because that username is already taken by some other user, you're getting this validation error. It says username is already existing. And this message is actually configured in the properties file. Yeah. So how exactly it works? How exactly it works? So when you submit the form, first of all, you see the register, uh, the register form data will be populated into register object, right? It is populated into that register object, and then first of all, the supports method will be called, and that register class object is passed on to this supports method. So where we'll check whether that object the framework is trying to validate is that register class type or not. Okay. Yes. So if it returns true, then it calls it validate method now. If it returns true, then it calls validate method and will pass that command object and errors object. You see, we'll take that command object and we are searching for that username. We are searching for that username. So if that user supplied username, so if it is already existing in that list, if it is existing in that list, then it indicates that the username is already taken by some other user, which is basically a validation error, which is basically a validation error, I can say. Yes. So if it is a validation error, so what we'll do here, you see, we'll report it to the framework this way. So you'll call this reject value method. The first parameter we are passing is that property of field name, for which property of field you got that validation error. Next, you know, the second parameter is that properties, the key of the properties file, the key here of the properties file. So that key which you got here, it represents that error message. It refers to the error message. And the third message is an alternate message. If by any chance if there is any issue with the properties file, okay, if that or with that key, so this message will be displayed. That's it. After this validate method finishes execution, the process request method will be invoked. So process request method will take how many parameters? It will take two parameters. So the first parameter here is, sorry, three parameters. The first parameter is that command object, and the second parameter is that binding result object, which helps the method controllers method to understand whether there is any validation error. And the third one, model object, which is used to share the response data with the JSP page, I can say. Once this method is called, so first of all, you see, this method will check whether there is any validation error. How? It will call has errors method, the binding result object. In that binding results object here, you see, we have that has errors method. So if that has errors method, if it returns true, then it indicates that there is a validation error. In that case, you see what we are doing, we are returning that input JSP name. Again, we want to display that same JSP, register JSP. That is what we are trying to do. Okay. And the framework itself will pass on that error message also to that particular properties file. It will also pass on that error messages also to that properties file. So you see the JSP page will be node. In the JSP we got this error tag which will display that error message. You see, especially for each property or field, text field, you can have a error tag. So if there is any validation error for that particular field or property, you see that error message will be displayed appropriately. That's it. That is what happens. So before that we saw how to create a validator by implementing validator interface, and we saw how to register the validator. So how do we register the validator? Yes. How do we register the validator? Yes. So we use init binder method for that purpose. Init binder in the controller, right? Yes, that's right. So very good. So we use that init binder method. See, here it is. Okay. So is it clear for you people? This is how you're going to write the custom validation code. Yes. So any questions in this regard? So I'll assume that there are no questions. Okay, good. So next we need to talk about the custom view components and the view resolvers here, different types of view resolvers. So that I'll do it in the next class. So we'll be done with this Spring MVC in the next class. One big module which is left over is AOP. Big in the sense like similar to MVC. That's it. Not good, greater than that. Okay. Yeah. So we will be done with this Spring framework soon. If I am done with the AOP, security is very small. So tomorrow, a notice, we'll meet tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Indian time instead of 7:30. Okay, please make a note of it. So tomorrow we'll meet at 8:30 p.m. Indian time. Okay, please make a note of it. Okay, yeah. So that's all for today then. Thank you.